Welcome to the Valley of Outlaws podcast, a podcast for those looking to take the road less trodden, and a podcast for those seeking more. Welcome to the Valley of Outlaws podcast.
Thank you, Will. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, with Dr. Mark Bloomfield. How exciting is this?
Well, I think the excitement is for me and the honours for me to be here as well.
Thank you very much. Well, you are Outlaw number 16. So remember that number. It will go with you for life. And, like I said, really appreciate you coming. I'm really excited for this. As always, I like to start with the same question, which is, who are you, what do you do, and why do you do what you do?
Big question. So I often describe myself as a failed aviator and a failed golfer. So I always wanted to be a pilot. And at 16, I started having flying lessons, but quickly realised I was colourblind. And that really started my career and fascination on disruption. So who am I? I'm an educator. I'm someone who's passionate about transformation. I'm someone who's passionate about exciting people about learning. And there's nothing for me more wonderful than those eyes widening. And when people see those insights and see those ideas, that's what really gets me excited. But at my heart, I'm a child.
I love that.
I'm a kid. I'm a 2-year-old kid that's just been given a cardboard box for the first time. Not interested in the toy that's in it. Not interested in the wrapping paper. I'm interested in this cardboard box and what's possible with that cardboard box.
Wow, very nice. That's actually one of the best opening answers I think I've ever had on this. I really like that. That is so interesting. Okay, so let's jump into innovation, because obviously I know you've been involved in this kind of space for a while and you teach it at Cambridge. So what does the term innovation actually mean to you?
So I think there's two different answers. So I'll take off the academic hat for a second. For me, it's this curiosity. It's this curiosity of having this childlike wonder and this curiosity and bravery to try new things. And that creativity really comes from this curiosity. And I think creativity leads into exploring and finding new thoughts and ideas. Now, if I was putting the academic hat back on, I would say innovation is novel solutions to meaningful problems that creates value. Now, if I think about the world we're living in and the world is changing, whether it's climate change or social norms, for me, the interesting part of innovation now is meaningful problems. What are the meaningful problems we have to solve as individuals, as societies, as companies? And the more time we can spend being curious about those meaningful problems, whether it's for our customers, whether it's for our friends, that's where the insight comes from. I think we've grown up in this world where we're so busy delivering lots of novel solutions without saying, are they meaningful problems? And so I love this idea of going back to being a child, slowing down, finding those meaningful problems, and then coming together as groups to solve them, where we can build these solutions that actually creates value. So a combination of curiosity breeding to creativity, but more formally, this idea of identification of meaningful problems, and then how we can collectively build solutions that creates value.
Why do you use the word novel solutions, or just to expand on that? Because interesting choice in front of it.
Yeah, so I think for me, the idea of novel is, it can mean different things to different people. I really quite like the idea of something new. Now, something new can be inherently iterative. It can build on something. So I like the idea of iterations, but also this idea of how a different frame, a different perspective can breed something new. And so for me, novel is combining not just new, but with a different frame, a different angle on it. And I always like using the metaphor of a Rubik's Cube. So even at Cambridge, what I love, so the thing about Cambridge, first of all, is you're never the smartest person in the room, ever. But equally, and I have imposter syndrome massively every time I teach there, but I love it. It's like going into Toys R Us as a kid. All these wonderful people, all these extraordinary ideas. So what can I bring to the table? What I help, it really is, as a facilitator, I think people walk into this room with a very scrambled Rubik's Cube in their head. My job and our job collectively is to twist, to start revealing those little patterns. I'm not going to go, here's it, here's the answer. Because what I want to do is to help show them different ways they can progress forward. And so novel for those individuals might be right. Actually, how do I bring in new collaborators? How do I take a perspective of a 10-year-old child of what my new business might look like in 20 years? So for me, the idea of novelty is new, iterative, but bringing in new frames that sees the problem in a very different way.
Really interesting. Really like that as well. That kind of analogy is so interesting with the Rubik's Cube and actually visualizing that and seeing that, because it is so true that there isn't one way to do the Rubik's Cube, is there?
And also the Rubik's Cube is highly experimental. You know, I get obsessed, as you know, about experimentation and this willingness and bravery just to try things all the time. And, you know, when you see some children with Rubik's Cubes, it's, you know, it's so fast, you almost see smoke coming out of the Rubik's Cube. But actually, I think so much of life is like that. We think about what are our plans, what are our career plans, where are you going to be, Will, in 5 years' time? Will, what's your 10-year strategy? And actually, sometimes it's the bravery of saying, I'm going to try this next thing. I'm going to try this next move. I will see what will happen. That will give me feedback that will then inform what I do next. And I think there is so much pressure that comes with us individually as careers, with us as organizations, to have these majestic 10-year strategies. I think any analysis would show the ability to execute a 10-year strategy with clear precision is very difficult, if not nigh impossible, and it's probably never happened. So I'm a big advocate of experimentation as a route for innovation. But if I look at my kids who are 6 and 9, they don't call it innovation and experimentation. They just got to play.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what do you think some of like the biggest misconceptions are when maybe your students come in or you meet people who haven't necessarily got the whole grasp of the idea of what innovation is?
So I think most people have war wounds when it comes to innovation. I think many organizations say we want to be innovative. I don't think I've ever found an organization that says we don't want to be innovative. But most people say, well, innovation, it's slow, it costs money. We're not always seeing the return on investment that we've had. And I think that comes from many, many different reasons. So what I often like to do with individuals is to say, with innovation, why? Why has it cost you money? Or too much money? Why has it given you false expectations? Why has it not delivered on its promises? And really what you strip back to basics is people haven't de-risked their ideas quick enough. Someone said, right, I've got an idea in a boardroom. Will, I need £5 million. I'm going to go build this product. And then cue tumbleweed, no one buys the product. But the idea is saying every idea should be treated as a hypothesis that should be tested, and you get feedback early. Now, the joy and brilliance of any successful entrepreneur is to de-risk their idea quickly as possible and then scale. But so many organizations just don't think that way. They don't have that organizational muscle or mindset to de-risk ideas. And so often what I think is, let's go back to basics. Let's stop basics. Imagine we were kids. Imagine I've been given these tools. I've been given some sellotape, a box, and some scissors. And someone says, you've got to build a rocket ship. Now, most childs will go, right, got it. Plan, execute, sellotape, done. They'll try different things. They'll make mistakes. Sometimes they'll say, I'm annoyed I cut there. I shouldn't have cut there. Mum, Dad, I've run out of sellotape. Something will happen. Maybe in my case, maybe the sister might push the son into the cardboard box halfway through. And there's all these obstacles that come in, but that's life. But for many organizations, it's just to go back to basics, this willingness to take small, low-cost experiments. And I think I'm very blessed to have in my life a mentor at Judge called Professor Jaidi Prabhu, who introduced to me a number of years ago this idea of frugal innovation, how innovation takes place in a country like India. And the word actually stems from jugaad. There's this idea of improvisation or DIY. But for me, it's this embracing limited resources. Many organizations want to do more with more. I need more people, I need more money, I need more time. I like to flip that equation and say, well, actually, let's do it with less. If I had less resources, if I had less time, what does that force you to do? You say, well, okay, that means I've got to do something quickly, cheaply, and learn fast. And that's a very different mindset. The other angle is people would say innovation is not efficient. So if you're an organization that executes, operational precision, and then someone said, okay, well, now you've got to innovate. What you're asking them to do is to take their foot off the gas pedal to allow some time to do something new or novel that may not pay off. There's an element of uncertainty. And that requires a bravery to say, right, we're 100% efficient now, but we're now going to be 95% efficient because we're going to explore something. That exploration may, in fact, propel us to a whole new level of business. But it's a bet. It's a strategic bet. And that just takes time and it takes a willingness. Now, many organizations do that in different ways. But for me, the organizations often have these war wounds, these scars. It takes too long. We haven't got the right people. We can't do it. And it's just wrong because actually what I think we've lost is that ability to reconnect as a child.
Yeah.
This curiosity.
Yeah. So interesting. And do you think a lot of businesses as well are kind of limited because of an expectation of a result they expect to get from the kind of innovation? Like, I always think that if you have an expectation of how you think something's going to go, you're only going to fight for that result, and you're so closed to all these other possibilities.
Yeah.
I personally think that's also what limits a lot of people in their lives as well. But I think business as well, it can relate to.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of answer it from a career perspective first, then as a business, because I think they're analogous. When I left the corporate world 18 months ago, it was this idea of, I don't know what I want to do. It took me 8 months to stop saying, hi, I'm Mark from Global, because it was so caught in my identity.
Yeah.
But a mentor of mine gave me this opportunity, a challenge, a chap called Mike Barry. He said to go and meet 100 people in 100 days. And that was great for me, because the first time in my career I was having meetings without intent. I wasn't formulating a plan. I wasn't selling, I wasn't buying. And I met these extraordinary people for the first time. Now, I actually think we can take that analogy back into an organization. So often in organizations, we have go-to people, right? Will's the innovative man. I'm going to go to Will. I'm going to give him the brief. But actually what we don't do is this collective sense-making of bringing different people around the table to get different ideas. Because one of the quickest ways to de-risk an idea is to get feedback from people who are already there. Someone might know why it won't work. Someone might perceive a constraint. I could go and spend £1 million and say, well, you should have spoken to Will. he did it last year and didn't work.
Yeah.
So actually this idea of how we engage more people in an organization, not to go off and all be the innovation team, but to get their perspective, their frame, their insight, because they might have different ideas that we just don't see because we're so busy of going to our go-to people.
Interesting. Really interesting. And do you think that actually sometimes the naivety of people who aren't fully engrossed in it as well is actually a blessing?
Yeah,
because I think it is.
It's a great question. I think there are some people who are very, very happy to be executing, delivering, really just to do the day-to-day work that's critical to any business success. I think often businesses perceive, the innovation team, they're over there, they're special, they have some mystic halo that surrounds them. And they're just the day-to-day people. That's just not true, because the day-to-day people, they're the ones that bring in the money, they're the ones that make the business tick over, they're the ones that facilitate any investment in the innovation. So I'm not sure if it's a naivety, but I also think there's an opportunity for people to really have this inclusive approach to innovation. I don't think there needs to be an innovation team per se, but what we want to do, if in any organization you have extraordinary humans who will have very unique and rich life experiences, and actually those life experiences bring a different frame. So as you can see, I wear glasses, and I often say when you wear glasses, when you put glasses on, you frame things in and you frame things out. And I think if we had a table of different people right now, we'll all see a similar problem, but in a very different way. And for me, that's the richness, and that's the opportunity for any organization to create a tapestry based upon the insights of those people around them.
Interesting. And do you think as well, a successful business, I'm thinking straight away of someone like Elon Musk, having like an innovative leader who doesn't necessarily kind of like overly control, but gives people the freedom to explore, is what it drives it? Or do you think it can also drive from the underneath? Because, you've got a lot of businesses who've got a lot of responsibility. They have to make sure people are paid. They've got to make sure the business is making money. They're scared of change. Does it rely on those people at the top, or is it a balance of both?
I think it's both. I think for any innovation to be successful in a company, it needs to be top down and bottom up, because you want to create a culture of curiosity. You want to take, if someone in my team when I was at Global had seen an interesting article, that's interesting, and that makes you think, what implications could this mean? Now, in reality, that's irrelevant unless we manage to flow it up to the part of the organization where decisions are made, where resources are allocated. Equally, there needs to be a recognition from the top that there are opportunities to be explored. But this idea of how an organization aligns to make that happen, I find is really interesting. So one of my favorite analogies for this particular question is, imagine I am an organization, as in my body. My corporate objective would be to lose weight. A topic quite close to my heart and my gut. And so I would create a department of eating and a department of exercise.
Okay.
My department of eating would say, right, he's got to lose weight. 1 meal a day. Nailed it.
Yeah.
My department of exercise would say, how's he going to lose weight? A marathon a day. Nailed it. And they both beautifully aligned with this corporate mission, this need to innovate and reduce weight. But what have they done? They've killed me. Because there's no way, as we know, we can do a marathon day and 1 meal a day.
Yeah.
So actually, it relies on this overarching view of we need to be innovative. We need to have clarity on our goals and objectives. But there needs to be systems and processes in place where actually knowledge can be exchanged, the curiosity there, and this information can flow back up into an organization. Because actually, even in my experience, some of the best innovations don't come from having a dedicated innovation team. It comes from bringing together a cross-functional team where you have people from sales, marketing, finance, operations. And because it comes back to that basic thing of we want to have different frames around the table, that very much diverse and inclusive table where different people's worldviews, opinions, expertise, and backgrounds can be surfaced. Because that's the beauty of being human, is that richness of those experiences.
Why also is it so important that businesses need to innovate? I know for growth and turnover, but in terms of for people and mindset and that kind of position, I guess, as opposed to just making money.
So I think there are 2 or 3 angles on this. I think the first one is a thesis of mine. Every business will be disrupted. It's not a case of if but when. So, and there are so many different organizations, how things move, that your business will be disrupted. That might be disrupted by a competitor, that might be disrupted by market regulation, by a social norm, something that's socially acceptable now might not be in 3 to 4 years. So every organization needs to say, right, how may my future context change? And what's coming towards me? So let me give you a slight digression analogy. So had we recorded this podcast before Christmas, I would have mentioned Scrooge.
Okay.
So if you think about an organization, every organization has a Scrooge. I don't mean someone in the finance department, but I mean everyone.
Usually is though.
Sometimes. I don't want to get in too much trouble. But this idea of every organization has a ghost of Christmas past. Things that we've done in the past that have worked. And many organizations think, well, we did well last year, everyone. Let's do the same again, plus 5%. Now that could say, well, to deliver the 5%, we may have to be innovative. Let's park the idea for a second. Then they have a ghost of Christmas present. These are the things they've decided and committed to that they want to execute now. Now that could have implications, but how are they executing? That might also require some innovation, maybe new collaborations, new partnerships, new distribution strategy, new creative marketing, advertising. And then the one I get the most interested by is the ghost of Christmas yet to come. Because for those who have read the story or seen any of the movies, for me, this was the one that really pulled at Scrooge's heartstrings, that really facilitated the transformation. So what I love thinking about from an innovation point of view is, what are the things that are coming towards me? So that could be around regulation towards climate, that might be social norms, that might be technological changes. And then, well, how do we then have a future-facing innovation strategy? How do we enable us? What do we need to do now to innovate today to ensure we have a successful and thriving business for tomorrow? Now, that means, right, okay, I don't know how the future is going to play out. I just don't know. So what do we have to do? Well, okay, you have to experiment. You have to try things. You have to collaborate with different people. You have to include people who haven't been included before, because we just don't know how it's going to play out. Now, whether you're thinking around a growth strategy, which is based upon the history projected forward, what you're doing now, the future yet to come, if you want a thriving business, you will always have to reimagine what you're going to do next. And if we go back to being a kid again, if I want to reimagine something, I have to be curious, I have to be engaged, and that will lead to creativity. So sometimes if we just drop the word innovation and just say, how do we have a more creative, inclusive approach to problem solving that will enable us to have a robust business in the future or a resilient business in the future? I think that's the way forward.
Interesting. It's funny because I've just finished reading the book by Rick Rubin called The Creative Act, A Way of Being.
Fabulous book.
Yeah, brilliant book. And I put a quote down here, and I really love it because I think it really goes to this whole idea of the childhood playing element of it. So he says, we tend to think that what we are making is the most important thing in our lives and that it's going to define us for all eternity. He says, we're not playing to win, we're playing to play. And ultimately, playing is fun. Perfectionism gets in the way of fun. That's it. What are your thoughts on that?
So I agree. I'll give you a couple of anecdotes. So if I take you back to when I did my PhD, so my PhD was on wing design for Airbus. Still probably the happiest I've ever been professionally. I was hyper focused on this problem, surrounded by extraordinary people. And it was just a wonderful time to be. But what's really interesting is when you're so focused on this problem, you think the whole world is centered on this. And you're so deep, you're working literally 12, 15 hours a day on this very small problem. But because you're so focused on it, your reality is this is the most important thing in the world. Now, my PhD was around layering carbon fiber at different angles in a plane to ensure it could be stiff enough to survive different conditions in flight, but light enough to reduce CO2 emissions. Now, I was enthralled by that problem, but clearly there's lots of other issues around the world, war, famine, everything else that's happening, but you get so focused. Now, at that time, you step back and as your career goes by, you go, wow, I was naive. That was very much one small part of the puzzle. Yeah. And actually what I didn't do enough at that time was to have different perspectives. Because in the same way when you're building a plane, just because you design these amazing wings, if they can't be connected to the fuselage, it's irrelevant. Yes. And that was actually a massive learning experience for me to think, actually, how do I bring different disparate groups around the table? What are these novel collaborations? There's also another flight analogy in there before I come back to this idea of play. Yeah. When you're flying through turbulence, and as I said to you before, I'm someone who loves flying through turbulence, both as a passenger and when I did my flying. And for me, apart from this feeling of being alive, what pilots often do, they wouldn't notionally call it this, but they experiment with the altitude as they're flying through turbulence, mostly to make sure the passenger experience is more comfortable. Yeah. Trolleys aren't rammed into someone's arms, drinks aren't spilled, etc., etc. So I love this idea of experimentation, this idea of play in different contexts and circumstances. So to take Rick's quote, I think the nature of everything that we do is play, but we forget it. We give it different labels. Because they say, oh, what are you doing today? Imagine talking to your friends. So I'm 40 years old now. So imagine me going next door, knock on my neighbour's door and say, would you like to come out and play? I can't imagine the looks that would give. But inherently, whether that was to go to a bar to have a drink, whether I was going to go play golf with my neighbour, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying different circumstances. Now, imagine when I go to the golf club with a neighbour or friend, do I have a strategy for how the day is going to take place with KPIs and metrics that I'm going to measure myself if lunch isn't served by 12:02? If I did, I'd be more worried about myself. But fundamentally, we embrace things, disruptions happen, the rain kicks in, you have to change plans. And actually what we're doing all the time is just improvising. That's all we're doing. We're just improvising all the time. And this was made very much aware to me by a friend of mine in Cambridge, Johnny Moore, who does a lot of work on this. And the more and more I reflect, the more I think around play, improv, and pause. And I think that's the essence. And I think to Rick's quote, we can get so focused on this problem that we believe is the most important thing in the world. But if we just reconnect with what I think is our most fundamental state, which is play, and then how do we put ourselves in an environment that makes us really curious and aware, that's when doors start to get opened cerebrally, and I think literally as well.
It's interesting. Your answers also made me think a lot about parenting. And I don't have kids myself, but what I had a realization, I think it was maybe last year or the year before, of looking at my parents and going, this is their first time of having kids, and they are doing the best they can do to raise me and give me the best opportunities. And I think when you're a child, you look up and you think, the parents have got the plan. You're going to this school, you're going to that university, you've got a career sorted. Yep. And it's like, they have this idea and this expectation, but it is improvisation.
Massively. I mean, there's a whole other podcast series here about my parental fails and wins. But I mean, your podcast is Valley of Outlaws, and I think that's very apt for parenting. Yeah. So I mean, I'm very blessed to have 2 children, and the first time you treat it like, right, we have to make sure we have the buggy, the nappies, everything. All the inventory is procured. and I remember once being in a very senior meeting in my previous company, and I left the WhatsApp browser on, and I was presenting to this group Are you allowed expletives on this podcast?
Yes,
right.
Yes.
Okay. So in the midst of this massive presentation, I was talking and bing. Why didn't you buy the fucking nappies? Suddenly appears. And actually that's life. There's so much beauty in that because you can't always predict and anticipate everything, but it's how you react. You know, it's one of the old quotes that you can't decide the cards you're dealt, only how you play the hand. And I think that's very true. And parenting is improv all the time. I mean, I have so many stories about how I've had to adapt my kids. One of my funniest ones was actually during COVID. So my daughter, we went for a walk in the village. And out of nowhere, she says to me, Papa, you need to let me play video games. Now, having worked in media for a number of years, my wife and I are mildly anti-screen. And I said to her, darling, why? And she must have been listening to some of my Cambridge talks online during COVID, because she pauses and deadpans me and says, because it'll add value to my childhood. And as a parent, how do you come back from that? I mean, equally when I set up my own business, which I'm sure we'll touch on later on, my son saw this letter come through from company's house. And said, what's this? And my son, by the way, is obsessed with money. Okay. I mean, he's ruthless. When he was 4, he sold a subscription service to my dad, which is, Granddad, if I give you 2 pieces of art a week, will you give me a $5? And my dad just turns to me and says, I think I've just bought another subscription service. And my son, by the way, absolutely trashes me at Monopoly. It is unbelievable.
Really?
So he's very obsessed with money. So he sees this letter come through from company's house and says, Papa, what's this? I said, I've set up my own company. He said, oh, can I come work for you? I said, darling, you're a bit young, you know, maybe when you're older, we can work together. He said, no, it's okay. Call the school and tell them I'm not coming back. and so I think actually, you know, in those moments, you have to improvise. You don't wake up with this perfect plan of how the day is going to come out. You know, sometimes my daughter may have an argument with her best friend. My son might get involved in a knock at school playing football. And parenting is one big improv. But improvisation, going back to Dugard innovation, it's how you improvise with very limited resources. And economically, for some families, those resources are severely limited. So, and I think for me, this idea of how we do better with less is the big innovation call to action. And it's not doing more with less, because I think that's become a bit of a cliche, but doing better with less. And this idea of better links back to the earlier conversation on novelty.
Yeah, it actually links to something I was going to ask as well, which is it seems that innovation is also more of a mindset than an action. It's actually really, you know, as you said, better with less is actually, we've got this, what can we get out of it? Yeah. And that is a shift in mindset. A lot of people, as you said, we haven't got the budget for this, we haven't got this, we haven't got that. And it is essentially just have a bit more awareness to what's going on out there. And just start making moves.
Yeah. I mean, and also as well, I think in many organisations, innovation sometimes follows a process that's very similar to the old Vicar of Dibley quote, which is yes, no. And it's how you change that. But no, it absolutely is a mindset. So it was interesting. So I did sleep very well last night. I think I was so excited about this podcast, Will. It was like Christmas Eve. And for some reason in my head, I built this new podcast called Strategy Songs.
Okay.
And it was you and I basically picking songs and then discussing what impact that could have on strategy. What can we learn from the Beatles? Here Comes the Sun. And so there may be something interesting there. But what's interesting is, where did that thought come from? And this idea of novelty and innovation is actually sometimes smashing different ideas together that don't seem obvious. And I think that's another frame of novelty to that point earlier on, is bringing things together that don't always seem like they should be together. And just how you adapt. So I was very lucky to be in Lapland over Christmas and had a wonderful time, a great conversation with a musher. And he was talking about how he improvises when something happens to the sleigh. Because in the middle of nowhere, if something happens to the sleigh, he might not have nails, pieces of wood, or other materials that support the structure of the sleigh. So he has to improvise. Sometimes he has to take a branch and weave it around to kind of stabilize it. And this idea of when you're in an environment, how do you improvise? Now, the idea of improvisation is usually centered on small resources, very limited resources. So for me, I think where innovation is going to go and shift as a topic is around improv. So then to your point of mindset, how can you teach improv? Well, stand-up comedy, improv theatre. You can give people these experiences to feel what it's like when you have to improvise. Now, having to do stand-up comedy on the spot is very hard. And we're not going to do it today before you get any ideas. But the idea of how you develop that, and like any muscle or mental muscle, the more you do it, the easier it gets. So rather than any project, you should say, okay, what resources do I have? What do I have available to me? How can I take my next first step as quickly and as efficiently as possible? And how can I learn? Because if you're a stand-up comedian and you tell a joke and it doesn't land, you get immediate feedback.
Yeah.
In the same way, any business or an entrepreneur who has an idea, you want to de-risk that idea with feedback pretty quickly. Now, if a joke doesn't work well, you have two choices. You can say, I'm never going to tell that joke again, which in my case is often the case. Or you say, well, actually, that might be not the right market. I'm going to try that on my next gig.
Okay. Yeah.
And the willingness to try. But it 100% is a mindset.
Yeah. It's interesting. What's your thoughts on kind of the education system? Okay. And it's a broad question, this, but I look back on my education, and I'm probably from a different era. I think now schools are a lot more open to entrepreneurship and that kind of creative thinking and letting people really express who they want to be. What's your thoughts on kind of education? Because I saw an article yesterday of this school, I think it's in America. I think they do 2 hours of classes a day. And then the rest of the day is life skills, public speaking, learning how to communicate with friends, learning how to do team building exercises, those kind of things. Do you think that a lot of our education systems stunt us from really continuing to play and we take everything too seriously? Or do you think that it's just, we do have to learn this information to be able to then apply it back to our life later on?
So before I answer that, what do you think is the purpose of the education system?
I think it's to have a broad understanding of the world and its current state, the past, potentially looking at the future, being able to get a basic level of skill so I can actually be in the world and actually add value.
Yeah, and I think also to understand the context you're in, that might be to reconnect you with nature, to reconnect you with individuals, or to have experiences with different parts of life. I think education is going to be massively disrupted. Because if you go to the basics now, if I think about my degrees and your degree, the idea being there's probably better content online now than any of the lectures we ever had.
Yeah.
So the education experience, yes, there's content, but is it really about content? I think what's interesting for me now is the curation of the content, and then also to understand the context in which it can be used. So as an example, I was very lucky to go to a concert 2 nights ago where my daughter performed with Young Voices at the O2 Arena. And there was an artist on stage called MC Grammar, which we spoke about earlier on. Great player, MC Hammer. And he did a rap about World Book Day. And the MC noted that his underlying philosophy is we need to understand how kids learn and teach them in that way, rather than force-feeding a national curriculum. So much of our education system, at least in my experience, was centered on regurgitation. How much can you store in your memory that you can write down papers and prove that you can recall and retain that information for a period of time? Now, that is a model.
Yeah.
But in the famous phrase, all models are wrong, some are useful. What are the alternative education and pedagogical models? Now, my preference is giving educational experiences that are immersive, inclusive, centered on experience, but that are memorable and impactful. Most importantly, centered in fun. Because that's how we retain, if we have a good night out with friends and a story's told, we retain that because it's in a format which is fun, it's playful. And so I think there's a massive opportunity for education institutions to rethink not the content it's teaching, there's always opportunities there, but how it's taught.
Yeah.
And there's lots of research around educational styles and how we learn. But I love this idea of when we're 2 years old, we don't get shown a PowerPoint presentation called How to Play. Framework 1, sharing. It doesn't happen. It's a very intuitive, very natural state. Now, the education system, and I see this at my kids' schools, and it's no fault of their own, but this play-centered learning gets kicked out of you. And then, as we get older, we call it innovation and experimentation and intelligent failure. and strategic bets.
Yeah, yeah.
It's play.
Yeah.
But clearly it should be focused play, intentional play, but the more schools can do that, the better. I'm not actually convinced the school system is doing it better now. I think when I was at school, it was better. Now, that could be because I'm no longer the customer. When I was there, I was the customer, I was in schools. Yeah. I think it's very different. I think there's lots of different expectations and pressures on teachers, financial time. I mean, even at my kids' school, I see parents, if I think of parents as other customers or stakeholders, if we're using the business lingo, queuing at the door to talk to the teacher each morning to give them feedback about what she said or done the previous day. I could not imagine that when I was at school. But yeah, I felt my learning was always centered in play. And we were always taught to embrace that curiosity. And if you have an idea, to hold it, because, as Johnny Ive always said, ideas are fragile. And if you don't hold that idea, they can break. Whereas now, I mean, I joke. So my son, who's 6, they get given homework. And I think that's ridiculous, personally. A 6-year-old should be learning how to play. But his homework often constitutes spelling tests. And so a few weeks ago, the spelling test came home and word number 1 was baguette. Because evidently, this is what's important for a 6-year-old child to know a French word. And you just think, well, actually, if education was spent on more about go home, find a cardboard box, do better with less. If we can teach that philosophy and sustain this mindset of curiosity through their career, I think 2 things. I think we will breed more entrepreneurs, but I actually think the world will be a better place.
I agree with you. Yeah, no, I agree. I made me think a lot of when I was studying architecture at university. So we were at a very kind of arts-based architectural school. And my final year, I was in a unit which was, they took the whole idea of form follows function and they flipped it. So they said function follows form. So what I want you to do is learn a skill. So they basically said, go to a museum, find an artifact, learn how they built that. So I chose the snowshoe, steam bent wood, tension, And he goes, right, go and learn how to steam bend. So I built a steam bending box. And then I learned how to skin a rabbit and how to dry so I can get leather. And then I can make tension from the strings and stuff. And that whole kind of idea of just process then informed the architecture I designed in the final year. So my final year I created this, I think we had to create our own artifact. So I created this kind of steam bent sculpture I soaked plywood around outside, steam bent the structure, then soaked plywood around the outside, and then had tension string and rope between it, trying to really keep it in place. And I remember my teacher, I was like, I've done it, okay. And he comes and goes, right, so what part of the building is this going to be? And we just held up and started looking at it. Oh, look at the way the light comes from here. And it was like, it just blew my mind because it was a flip on this whole idea that, form follows function. This has to have a purpose. And that purpose is really what kind of like, sort of like, okay, learning how to spell baguette is useful when you are, at a sandwich shop.
Which clearly is a massive driver for a 6-year-old child.
Yeah, exactly. But that ability just to see differently and go, it's like this with the podcast. Like for me, I have no expectations what the podcast is going to be, but I now know how to set up a podcast, how to edit a podcast, lighting, recording, all that kind of stuff. It's just skills I've learned. And I've added those skills to my kind of book of skills I've got.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was the foundation for the architecture school. The design way of thinking was like, just learn the skills and think how you can apply it to architecture. And I wish more people because if you look at some of the architecture around the UK, it's shoddy and shocking. I think it was Geary says 95% of all architecture is crap, and it's true. Like it's just it's awful. Yeah. But it's in essence of that is like we just don't ever get given that kind of idea to flip the book and just go and learn something and see what you can do with that skill set. I want to jump into kind of you as a child and going back into that and understanding where this whole kind of fire came from.
Californian therapy moment, isn't it?
I'm just really interested in it. Were you a child who was always out there playing, or were you kind of very much interested in learning or sporty? What was your kind of like thought?
I was a difficult child. I remember, I wasn't old enough to, I was old enough. But I remember when, I think I was about 3, I would always give my mum a hard time when I came home from preschool. I always wanted to be active. I was always a very mentally active child. And even I think my mum and dad would tell me stories of when I was 7 months, I couldn't yet walk, but I really wanted to be mentally active all the time. And so I think when I was about 5, I think my mum was like, I just can't deal with him after school. So my grandparents, my dad's parents, would begin to pick me up from school, and I'd go back to their house every night. And my granddad was an unbelievably creative guy, particularly with woodwork and metalwork. And I would watch and see what he does. You know, sometimes the sandpapering of the wood, walk away, try different things. And he would make my sister and I these extraordinary toys, often from quite limited resources. I remember once, when I think I was like 7 and really into Robin Hood. I think this is when the Kevin Costner movie came out, so I would have been 8. And he decided to, because I had these Robin Hood action figures, and he decided he was going to make me kind of this Robin Hood, Merry Men, Sherwood Forest style toy. And he couldn't find any wood. And he came to our house. My dad's called Gary. He said, Gary, can I have that branch off the tree? And he just cut it and built this most extraordinary Sherwood Forest camp with like faux lichen and everything. And so I was always surrounded by that creativity, and equally from my grandma to see her creativity when she used to cook. So I used to help her cook all the time. But equally, she used to teach me things like, you know, just from a very young age, shops, where she would, on the ironing board, she would put all the, you know, the dry goods, the tins, and she would encourage me to try and sell them to her. So these kind of play life skills, this ability to cook, to be creative, to use limited resources to sell. And as I was selling, of course, I'm counting money, so I'm thinking about maths. And so there's some of my earliest childhood memories of actually having that. My parents always let me try different things. Sometimes they didn't always go right, and sometimes that led to a lot of mess. But my parents always gave me this permission to try things. And if it didn't work out, that's okay. That's okay. It was, and sometimes that's a lesson I have to remind myself now, because when my kids say, right, can we make a potion? Your immediate thought is, oh, more dishes. No, more things to clean. Yeah. But then you have to go, no, Mark, that's the wrong mindset. So even though I've been through that experience, it's a mindset you have to make sure you're on top of all the time. I wasn't overly sporty. I played football from a young age. I was a goalkeeper. I think I always liked individual sports more than team sports. And I think golf, that's why golf really attracted me. And I think really that was centered around, it's you versus you. And there's no, if you do a shot that works out poorly or it doesn't go the way you want it to, it's your fault. And you have to reflect on that. And I think for me, that's always been a massive lesson to me, this idea of intelligent failure. And what I found when I played golf from a very young age, my style of golf was very aggressive. I don't mean I get angry and break clubs across my knee, but some golfers play golf very safely.
Yeah.
I'm very experimental. I always aim for the pin. I'm very aggressive.
Yeah.
Even if that means I'm probably going to go in the lake, hit the tree, or maybe knock a squirrel out of the woods. I'm very focused on trying a very different creative shot, because it's golf. I'm in a safe to fail environment.
Well, and Dustin Johnson said, I think it was, what was it, a month ago in an interview I heard, he goes, when you play golf, you set out to play the perfect round, but what you're doing is you're failing off the first shot because you're not hitting it exactly where you want it to go. Yeah. And it's just learning to fail and go, right, deal with the next problem, deal with the next problem. Interesting.
And I think that's the essence of resilience. You know, whether you call it bouncer back ability, this ability to do a bad shot and then try something else. You know, the old quote about the most important shot is the next one, and it's very true. But every single golf shot is an experiment because it's a precise sport. And actually, if you're not playing well, you have to go back to basics. And that's also true for businesses. So if I'm not playing well on a golf course, I will go back to a 3/4 swing. Sometimes a half swing, depending on how bad the game is. If it's really bad, I might leave after the night. But this idea of actually constraining yourself comes back to this idea of doing better with less. Golfers, in my experience, often do better with less clubs, shorter swings. I mean, at a certain level. I mean, obviously, if you're heading towards pro, it's different. And I love that metaphor back to businesses, because actually, when things aren't going well, when things are bumpy in a business, you still need to be experimental, you need to try new things. Actually, constraining yourself is also interesting, I think.
No, really interesting. I will go back into golf a bit later and bring it into the transformation tour.
I brought it up too early.
No, not at all. But it's so interesting because I was going to say, like, are you someone when you play with someone new, you're judging the way they play, actually their ability, how easy they innovate, or what kind of personality they're like? Can you see that in a aggression of play? I guess. Do you go, oh god, this person's too safe?
It's an interesting question. I'd be careful how I answer this.
Are there a lot of people trembling at the moment?
I observe. I think golf, when you play golf, I think you can observe a lot about people's character. But I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing. I definitely don't judge because, people bring their whole selves to the course. If you've had a bad night or something bad's happened at home or work's tough, it's very hard to leave that. It still manifests itself in thought and consciousness, even when you're going around the course. So it gives me insights to how people are reacting to different contexts, but I don't judge them for it.
Yeah.
But for me, when I play with someone playing golf that's new, what I really love is the conversation.
Yes.
Because how much time do you actually spend hitting the ball?
Yeah.
Very little as you go on the golf course. And for me, the opportunity is to speak with someone, to hear their story, their context, their challenge. And it goes back to the teaching quote, when one teaches, two learn. And for me, just to hear their worldview, their frame, it makes me think, right, okay, that's an interesting perspective. Because I know I can't do everything alone. So to get someone else's insight about how they're doing, how their business is moving, actually it's just making the cogs in my head start to move and think, is there a different view here? And also when you're playing, whether it's 2, 3s or 4s, there's shared pain. There's moments of humor when you think the ball's hit the green, it rolls back into the lake. There's all of those emotions.
Yeah.
And actually for me, the golf course creates this canvas where you see these emotions, these experiences come to life, but centered around a very human experience and how you have those moments of pleasure, joy, the conversations, the peer coaching, the support, those laughs. For me, it's there, but also centered in this extraordinary natural environment.
Yeah.
And you're walking, mostly well-being is that too. So I think golf is just this extraordinary canvas.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, let's before we get in, I want to kind of understand also the career changes. So going from university studying that, going into what was it, aeronautics?
Yeah, aerospace engineering.
Yeah, okay, engineering, and then it was global media, and then teaching, and then back through the golf now. What are you someone who you were always going to change career? Because some people are very much like, I know I want to be in this for a whole period of time. Or are you someone that's kind of not really planning and just following inspiration?
So it's really interesting. So there's a book called Seeing Around Corners by Columbia University Professor called Rita McGrath, and it's this idea of sectors versus arenas. So some people grow up and I want to be in this industry, I want to be in this sector. Yeah. I've always been interested in problems. I like thorny problems. When I was younger, I liked being lost in problems, and sometimes those problems transcend and carry across multiple industries. So yeah, I wanted to be a pilot, found out I was colorblind, that wasn't going to happen. As your guests will see, I'm not graced with the body shape to be a military pilot, so something else had to happen. I went to university, did maths as undergraduate, didn't know what I wanted to do, like most students. And then there was this wonderful opportunity to be paid to do a PhD. So okay, well, this is great, I get paid to be a student. Never studied engineering before, so I had to pivot into this world. Surrounded by just the most amazing people at university who supported me to learn broadly an engineering degree in a matter of months to get me up to a certain level of lingo. But what I was interested in, I was the mathematician of this engineering team. And it was quite an interesting reflection of what you bring to the table. And this has always been career advice I give people. Make yourself interesting, but when you come to the table, add value. Yeah. And so actually I found my place. And I also saw how some professors supported or didn't support their students, and I think often when I could see that triggered in me this desire to want to help people and support them. There was one, I won't name names, but there was one environment where one of the professors made another PhD student cry by just saying, "Your research is pointless," and I jumped to their defense. And I never thought, I want to be a manager, I want to be a leader. But there was something there that made me realize I like this idea of supporting people. I was actually meant to have an academic career, but 2008 financial crash killed that. So I actually went to work for Thomas Cook in Peterborough. So I went from inside the plane, or was outside the plane, to inside the plane as the shift. Yeah. And Thomas Cook was an extraordinary place to be because as a company, it was probably struggling at the time, but they wanted to invest in this thing called revenue management. So if, last time you flew, the price changes. Yeah. I'm one of the bastards responsible for those algorithms. There's a lot of karma coming my way.
I was speaking to a cleaner about this last night. And I was like, when you go to Portugal, because the price keeps changing. And I was like, you're going to have to go on a different IP address here. You have to trick it.
Use Hopper. Hopper's the best place to find out when to buy and firm flights. So I was there for 3 years. A lot of the work I was doing there was around building their proprietary technology to predict demand for holidays and varying the prices. But why I started to get interested there was why companies couldn't see things that were coming towards them. So, whether that was, the Icelandic volcano wasn't really their fault, nor were the shark attacks in Sharm el-Sheikh, or Shark el-Sheikh as it was called then. Yeah. But for me, what was really interesting is when the events started happening in Egypt and Tunisia, and how businesses weren't responding. Now, most of Thomas Cook's business was in North Africa and Turkey, and it was slow out the blocks. So when it says, right, we need to pivot our business over to the Balearic Islands, too late. All the rooms are gone, or the prices are too high. And I started to get really interesting how business was shifting, but that thread was stopped. And then I got headhunted to go to Global. And for most people that know, Global own most of the commercial radio stations in the UK. The big ones, Heart, Capital, LBC, Smooth. Yeah. And I loved it, and I always joke, going from Thomas Cook, where getting a cup of coffee was a 6-month sign-off process, to going to my first one-to-one, a wine bar in Soho, was a massive cultural shock. But I loved it. And to this day, I'm so, so grateful for the 10 years I had there. I mean, my first 4 years was building systems. But going back to the teaching point, I always loved trying to educate people about the opportunities, the systems, the processes, but in very different creative ways. Yeah. And so I think teaching has always been this undercurrent, and I don't know where that's come from, but I've always loved it. I've always loved the challenge of trying to get someone just to twist that Rubik's Cube in a different direction. And then I was there for 10 years, I had an extraordinary career there, and it was COVID, like many people, was a crucible moment for me. And I remember viscerally, I remember being on the train and Cat's Cradle, the song, came on Spotify. And for those people who don't know the song, it's the story of this man, his little boy. The man doesn't have time for the boy because he's so busy in his career. And, life passes by, and then he retires, and then his son has basically copied him his whole life. And I remember it was almost like a cold sweat moment, thinking, I'm not seeing my kids. I was a weekend parent pre-COVID. And thinking, there's more to this. Yeah. There's more to this. And also, seeing things like the pandemic and realizing this isn't going to be the last one. And I had this massive, I think, awakening, for lack of a better phrase, which was, Mark, you're an educator. Stop trying to be anything but. You've had such an extraordinary education in your life. Without blowing smoke up my own backside, I love storytelling. Yeah. I love engaging people with stories and different ways of seeing problems. Yeah. And the more I can do with that, the more I can help others. That's what I can bring to the party. And I had 2 extraordinary bosses at Global, and the last one, he was so supportive that it's time for something different. I don't know what that different thing is, but prior to that, I'd been given some guest talks at Cambridge, and I was very lucky to be made an honorary fellow judge. And to this day, I still teach there on a number of programs, and I love it, just love it. And it rekindled this passion. And different, there's always different things that get in your way. And so, I left Global September 2022, met 100 people in 100 days.
That's a great challenge, by the way.
It's great.
That is a brilliant challenge.
I slightly overachieved. I did 162.
Wow.
Yeah, and lots of coffee. And don't get me wrong, not every conversation's amazing.
No, of course.
There are some people you meet, you want to go, taxi, just to end it. But it's a great way of just going in a different direction. Yeah. And just seeing what emerges. And I love this idea, particularly in business, of deliberate versus emergent strategy. What's emerging. And then I set up a small business called Turbulence, which was to help organizations do that and think about future-facing innovation. And the day that happened, my mum was rushed to hospital. On the same day Turbulence was launched, she was rushed to hospital. And, she was in the hospital 5 months, and 5 months later she died. And, it was a tough time, but I reflect quite deeply on that now around, had I been in this commercial corporate role before, I wouldn't have had the time to be with her as much as I did. But I also think her being in hospital interjected this huge pause in my life to go, Mark, what is it you really want to do? Because it had been so easy for me to fall in the consultancy route. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but that's not what I really wanted to do. And that space, as we'll talk about in a second, led to something completely new. So I think the short answer to your question, I think teaching has always been an undercurrent, whether it was PhD, whether it's in the corporate world. Because for me, when those eyes widen, that magical moment of when eyes widen, there's nothing better feeling an educator when you see that moment.
Yeah, I'm sure. Fantastic. What an answer again, really. Honestly, I was taken on, as you said, you love storytelling. I was taken along that so well. You said earlier on that you struggle with imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Is that something which came apart when you're just at Cambridge, or was it always part of your life? And how do you deal with it? How do you accept it? Because everybody suffers with it at some point.
Yeah. It was definitely more real at Cambridge. I mean, I think every time I took on a bigger role, I felt it. And it's very much like being an entrepreneur. There are moments where you think, am I crazy? And then there are days where you have this calm conviction, followed by, am I insane? Followed by mild conviction. So, and it's cycles. I think with, I did have it at Cambridge because there are these extraordinary people. And at Cambridge, I teach on executive education, which are for CEOs, CFOs around the world. And it's amazing for me because I get to see things that I think work. They might not work well in Indonesia because of cultural variances. But I've been surrounded and blessed to work with just the most wonderful group of people at Judge who put me at ease, who share, your experiences are so relevant that, but if you go there with this view of you have to impart your knowledge and wisdom on the world, it makes you feel quite pressured. If you think your role there is to facilitate, to share some experiences, to share some provocations and questions that just help twist the Rubik's Cube. I'm not there as a strategy consultant to help that CEO get the answer. My job is to go, well, that could be an interesting route to explore. And I think that's helped kind of take the pressure off. So I feel it there. I still feel it to this day, but what I've learned to do is to channel it as an energy. To take that, and I think what I do now is when I go in the room and I think, right, okay, now I turn that into an awareness and I become hyper-focused, listening, trying to draw links. At the end of the day, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Because you're channeling it. But I've actually learned now how to use that, I think, to my advantage.
Of course, I think it's, the way I see it is when you feel in that kind of imposter syndrome or you feel kind of anxious, you're on your edge.
Yes.
And I would rather be much on my edge rather than in the comfort, soft zones. And so, as you said, if you can channel it as a positive thing, I think I only feel like this because I want to do the best I can do. Yeah. It kind of takes that pressure away. But as you said, you are so much more alert. I remember the first podcast I was listening, I was like, I need to hear every word he said and understand what this person says. And it's like, okay, you get used to it after a while, and you're.
And it's actually a really interesting point about the podcast, because I think it goes back to those 100 people in 100 days. When you're meeting someone, if you're buying or selling, you're like this all the time.
Yes.
And it was and it's so interesting how much people open up when you remove that pressure valve of, I'm not selling to you, I'm not buying to you. I want to hear your story, your life experiences, and let's just see where this conversation goes. And I think I made so many new connections and possible tributaries out of that approach. Then going, right, I've got this idea, it's going to cost this, will are you going to buy? Because I think everyone's exhausted of being sold to. Yeah. But I think people love this idea of being shown, right, I'm really interested in the meaningful problems that you want to solve. Are there ways in which we can create value together? And then what could be the novel solutions? Yeah. And that comes back to that definition of innovation. Yeah. And it starts, in my opinion, with that human connection.
I think people now are chasing connection more than anything. Yeah, and if they can help and be useful and be on the journey with someone, that gives them more fulfillment than any other element of that.
I agree. I agree.
Well, I want to talk about, you keep saying this a few times, creating space.
Yeah.
So I was with a men's group I was about 6 months with it. It was four of us in this thing. I had Tobias, who was on my podcast before Christmas, Outlaw number 13. And he challenged me in October because I realised that I overthink. I have so many things going on in my mind. And I always said to him, I can't meditate because I can't sit there and not think. And he was like, okay, let's try something else. Let's just create space. So what I want you to do is go to your bedroom, sit on your bed, leave your phone, everything outside, sit on your bed, have a glass of water and sit there for an hour and just see what comes out your mind. Create space for your mind to think and let whatever's deep down there come through. And as we talked about earlier with me painting, I paint art over a longer period of time. Like I'll look at a piece for half a year if I need to decide what the next move's going to be. How important do you think it is for people in life and business to create space to truly know where they want to go, how they want to make those next moves? And there's a balance to it. You don't want to stick around and just wait too long. You want to also be actively moving. But how important is that space to create, just to observe?
Wow. There's a whole podcast just on that question alone. I believe it is critical. I'll give you a couple of examples. So just as I was leaving Global, I was put in touch with two just amazing people called Rob Poynton and Alex Karabi, who run an online coaching program called Yellow. It's quite hard to call it online coaching because it's very hard to put in words exactly what it is, but it's a group of people who come together and they bring to life different exercises. Sometimes that's guided meditation, sometimes that's improv. And these are people you've never met and you're on Zoom, and it's, and sometimes it's strange. But I still remember the very first guided meditation that Alex took us on. And I'm not someone who practices meditation. And it was a really quite a profound, moving experience. So I remember being at my standing desk, and Alex's first question was, find a threshold. So you look around the room, and my eyes were drawn to where the bed was, and there was a mat right by the bed. And the threshold that I saw was going from the carpet where I was standing on to this mat. And then Alex's next question as well, what do you observe about the threshold? And this was the time when I was just leaving Global. So I was quite scared. I'd left the morphine of a salary to try something different. And I said, it's there, okay. And when I looked at this, it was a blue rug. Sorry, rather than mat, it was a blue rug, quite textured, high pile. But I could see where my kids had been running across it, so parts were trampled. And I looked at it, and what I saw was a stormy sea. These waves appearing, this thing, and that probably was a projection of the fear that I had around doing it. And then Alex then said, cross the threshold. So, okay, step onto the rug. What do you feel? Well, of course, it was a high-piled nylon rug, so it felt quite comfortable under the feet. But immediately, that pause, what I saw was my kids' footsteps. I saw that as a route across stormy waters. It completely reframed my perception. And then I thought, actually, these are people who are helping me set a path. And I was like, right, actually, my I guess, transition away from a corporate career is not just about me. It's with these collaborations that I find. Yeah. And then we obviously had to cross the threshold. And then Alex said, sit down. So I sat on the bed. My feet were planted on the rug. And I remember clear as day, the sun was just coming in the window, and the warmth was just kind of edging on my cheeks. And I just beamed. And I realized that by crossing that transition, even though I perceived it as uncharted waters, stormy seas, I was happier. And that stuck with me, absolutely stuck with me. And so for me, I gave myself that pause to do Yellow, to explore these different things. I've had many examples in my life where I didn't pause, and I think it's taken me way too long to find a solution to a problem. Now, the way I pause is through golf. Golf is the only thing I've ever done in my life where I'm completely free. Yeah. And so now, rather than going, right, okay, and sit on a problem, I might go to the driving range for 2 hours or go and play 9 holes. Yeah. And that pause, even though it's an active pause, is enough for me to start working. And I'll come back refreshed. Right, got it, way to go. And so for me, whether it's golf, whether it's a sport, whether it's meditation, whether it's time, whether it's book, this ability to unplug, to disconnect is critical. Now, I've always been a big reader, and to this day, I still try and get through, a book every 2 weeks. What was interesting was when I was at Global, actually my corporate career in general, I was always reading business books. The answer is on page 42. That's what I've got to find. And since I left Global, I now read a huge variety of books. And I feel far more creative now because I'm pulling in ideas from novels, fiction, non-fiction, kids' books. That's inspiring me in different directions, going, right, what's the right business model? What's the right strategy execution? So when you combine those different frames with pause, I find now I feel more creative than ever.
Beautiful. It's so true though as well. It is so true as well, because I think when you have that ability just to stop, you actually allow more in.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But you asked earlier on about why organizations sometimes don't innovate, because they perceive it as non-efficient. I mean, as a new business owner, I have guilt that if I'm not proactively thinking about the business or finding new opportunities, I feel guilty. I'm wasting time. But actually the pause makes me more innovative and creative. And that comes back to that definition that innovation is perceived as inefficient because you're taking your foot off the ball. But taking your foot off the ball lets different things happen that sometimes you may not expect. But that's why we need to do it in a constructive way. You don't want to have your foot off the ball all the time because someone will come and take the ball and score a goal. As a Spurs fan, I've seen this much in my lifetime. But I think that interjection of pause is key.
Would you describe yourself as a short-term or long-term thinker?
I think it depends. So I think generally I edge towards long-term thinker. I get fascinated around disruption, what's coming towards us. I think very much around the world that my kids will inhabit. And I think I've always felt a long-term into the future. But I think about short-term actions. So I know that's a bit of a lawyer's dodge to your question. So I like to think around what's going to happen in the future, but then the actions I'm going to take today. So I don't necessarily think it's about being short-term or long-term. It's how you marry the two up, but equally being aware of what keeps coming up and keeps coming. Many organizations talk about agility and pivoting and moving. But for me, it's this sensing of what's coming and how I might need to shift or change and adapt. In the same way, golf clubs are under lots of pressure, environmental reasons, people not playing the sport as much in different areas, the rise of virtual golf or driving range experiences. And so even if they're a golf clubs have to adapt. Golf clubs will need to become net community benefits to thrive in the future. But that requires this constant adjustment. And academically, I often say many organizations have to exist with this resource allocation under uncertainty. I've got to make decisions of not knowing how it's going to pay off. But the best way I can do that is experiment to find out information, also start to sense what's coming towards us. So I think I'm a medium-term thinker. I combine.
Did you give that option?
I wouldn't describe myself as that. It combines both because I think you can harmonize both to your benefit.
The transformation tool.
Yes.
Let's talk about that now.
Yes.
Look at his eyes light up.
Yes.
So why don't you... Well, I'm going to ask the same question I did at the start before the transformation tool. What is it? Why are you doing it? And how is it going to benefit people?
Sure. The Transformation Tour is a series of leadership development programs designed to catalyze business and personal transformation using a immersive golf-based approach. And so the idea being is every business is either flying through turbulence or will continue to fly through severe turbulence. And for me, this turbulence requires a transformation how we work. Now, historically, transformation has been this one-off project. For me, it's a capability. It's a capability of reimagining, rethinking, committing, experimenting, and testing. And I think there's a huge need and opportunity to provide individuals with the skills, strategies, and insights necessary to help them thrive personally and professionally. Now, that being what it is, it's then a question of, well, okay, how is it golf and why golf? The idea for me is that I always wanted to use golf as a canvas. Golf has taught me so much in my life and my career around resilience, around improvement, sometimes understanding the externalities of where I am. So the way the Transformation Tour works is we have one-day events each event is themed around a particular facet of business transformation, such as innovation, resilience, transformation mindset. And every golf course that we pick has its own unique story of transformation and sustainability. So places like Woburn, Walton Heath, Woodhall Spa, Thorpe Nest, to name but a few. When we play, we start every single day centered on well-being. Because for me, there's this idea of personal transformation to enable business transformation. If you can't commit to improving yourself physically, mentally, it's very hard to justify that you can go back and transform your business. Yeah. And so we're very lucky to work with an organization called Golf Forever. Golf Forever are faced by Scotty Scheffler, #1 golfer in the world. And what it is a golf fitness system. So it's a device you can attach to resistance bands to strengthen and open up your body. And we start with that in the morning because there's a communal experience of strengthening together. And I quite like the poetry of that, but also serves a secondary benefit of stretching before golf. So there's a short and long-term impact. But then we introduce the topic of the day. Now, I'm very blessed because of my relationship with Cambridge at Judge Business School that every single program we have a professor and or fellows coming to join us. Now, traditionally in a learning environment, you'd be given theory and content and then case studies. The way the transformation tour works is you have an experience first. And this experience is up to 18 holes. The reason it's up to 18 holes, because it depends on the golf course and the time we have. Sometimes 15 holes is enough. Yeah. And some might say, I love 18 holes. But one of the first principles of innovation is to challenge assumptions. So why 18 holes? Why does it have to be 4 hours? Now, as you play, you go out in groups of 4. And 2 things happen. First of all, every single hole is a challenge. We set a unique challenge for every single hole, and then we pose a reflection question. And we leverage peer coaching as a group of 4 to deepen those insights and conversations as you play through the round. When you come back, we then say, right, and what does that experience mean? Post that, we then have an immersive experience around topics like developing the golf course of the future. The idea is not that we're literally building the course of the future, but we think around how golf will have to adapt and transform as an industry as a metaphor to reflect on your business. Yeah. Number 1 rule, no slides. There's no slides on any of our programs.
Wow, okay.
And so everything is around finding novel, creative ways to engage. A bit like the MC Grammar example earlier on.
Yes.
It's having these memorable, impactful and fun ways. Yes. But also what we're also doing is introducing what we call strategic serendipity. These chance conversations with different people who join the programs may lead you down different paths that you've never been before. But I fundamentally believe that I can't teach you to have an insight. All I can do is to create an experience that makes an insight likely to happen. So our design job is to try and create these experiences using golf as the ultimate backdrop to teach you the skills and strategies necessary to transform your business, but then using the participants to create this community that brings and holds people together to have meaningful transformation. Why? Because transformation is a contact sport. You can't do it alone, and you can't just do it sitting in your boardroom. So ultimately, it is a golf-based approach to teach business people how to transform their business to ensure its resilience and longevity through novel ways of thinking, of working, and also building collaborative partnerships that may not be obvious.
Fantastic. And I know you said it's for business people, but what kind of people are we talking about? Is this going to really kind of benefit? And I know at university you're kind of like lecturing to very high level kind of individuals. Is this targeting for them, or is it a broader range of entrepreneurs and, different kind of people in different backgrounds?
Yeah, so I'll answer again without being a lawyer's dodge. So I think, as you know, as a startup, one of the key rules is focus, particularly in year 1. So we've had to make the decision that for year 1, it's for people who already play golf, first of all. And these for people who are not necessarily C-level or C, they could be on that journey, on that path. But these are people who want to commit to start to see the world in a different way, who are willing to commit to taking it at least one day out of their diary, to have an experience that may catalyze them or project them on a different path and journey. It's open, all genders, all backgrounds. It's not designed for that, but really it's for those people who are willing to commit to a transformation. because what we want to do is use the transformation tour as a vehicle to drive meaningful transformation to address some of the problems. Now, you asked a question before that I didn't fully answer, was around why. So the last 2 years at Global, I was heavily involved in our sustainability strategy. I'd always had an interest in sustainability, but never really found myself getting into it. And I was very fortunate to do a course at Cambridge during COVID, and it was a quintessential Archimedes screw. I completely transformed my worldview 360, but I was deeper. And that gave me just a burning realization that I need to do something. With the skills that I have, with my passion for storytelling, I need to do something different. Now, if we think about things that are coming towards us, the different facets of sustainability is one of them. You know, whether it's environmental, climate change, whether it's water shortages, whether it's biodiversity collapse, or whether it's how social norms are changing or how technological norms are changing. All of these things can be framed. One of my biggest desires and challenges is to get CEOs excited about sustainability, because it is the biggest innovation opportunity we will ever have. And so using that narrative and the transformation tour, not just about sustainability, but to bring in themes around sustainability is key, because sometimes sustainability has become a loaded word. And actually, if we break down the facets and components, what we're really thinking around is what's coming towards us. So as a business, rather than setting my strategy on moving on the tailwinds, what are the headwinds? And taking those headwinds, grabbing them and saying, how can we use these to actually transform our business? Because guess what? That's going to make your business more successful in the long term. So for me, the transformation tour was to equip people with it. Now, you asked earlier on as well about pause and space. Yes. On the golf course, you're having a 4-hour conversation. That's the pause and space. Now, from some of the events that we've tested, and obviously you very kindly came to one of them at Pitch in October, we've seen that this works. This idea, when you have a group of people together and you set them challenges working in groups for 4 hours, but surrounded by experiences, that's a very clever way to learn. It's an impactful way to learn. Yeah. And actually people think, right, I'm now motivated to go back to my business tomorrow and say, how are we going to change it?
Yeah, no, beautiful. What I would love to ask is about this whole setup as well is the hurdles you've had to overcome to get it to where it is, because when I've spoken to, you know, entrepreneurs, people in different areas, you know, musicians, dancers, whatever, sports people, the hurdles they jumped over to get to where they are is what differentiates them from the people who failed. So for you creating this, what have been the biggest challenges in the way for you to really get this up and running?
Yeah, sometimes it feels like swimming through hurdles rather than jumping through hurdles. Okay. So I think I've always believed in, especially for a new business, in bootstrapping. I do more with less or better with less, embracing limited resources. And so the first hurdle was to find people in the golf industry to give me feedback. And if I rewind to June last year, just before my mum died, I didn't know anyone in the golf sector. And so I really committed myself to doing this 100 people in 100 days venture again, but with the golf sector. And I reached out to some wonderful people like Phil Grice, who we both know, people like Eddie Bullock, who we both know. And there was a contagion effect of meeting new people. So the first hurdle was, how do I get feedback from people in golf? Yeah. And then how do I get feedback from people in business? Before I even start to test the idea, get feedback up front. And there was some great inputs that came. So from someone like Owen James at England Golf, who I'm very lucky to have on my advisory board, people like Petra Himmel, who do some incredible work on sustainable golf, threw provocations at me that did it. So rather than disappearing chitty chitty bang bang style and building a product, I started with sense making. Yeah. Is this right? Then the next hurdle was, okay, I need to test this prototype. And you came to the first prototype at Pitch. And that gave me enough feedback to go, right, I think there's something here. So that was more what I did. Some of the hurdles is you need to attract people to come. You need to be able to fund it. Now, everything I've done is try to be done in a way that's very low cost, or you work with partners and people who understand what you're trying to do. I think one of the biggest hurdles I had initially when I was approaching golf clubs was them not going, oh, this is a golf society day with a bacon sandwich and a cup of coffee. Yeah. It's like, this is absolutely not that. Yeah. And I think because what we're doing is so different, it is not a corporate day and it's not a golf society. We actually want to bring the story of the golf course to life. So when we go to Woburn, we're very future facing that they built a reservoir over 10 years ago, and this reservoir can now hold enough water for 3 years for all 3 golf courses. And so we take the participants down there to show what this innovation mindset towards sustainability. And then when you share what you want to do with golf courses, they go, right. There have been some golf courses, which I will not name on this podcast, who don't get it. Yeah. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Equally, there are some golf courses that I've met when I spoke about sustainability, and I had great conversations. And I say, is there anything else I need to know? And they said, well, clearly gentlemen must wear jackets in the bar upstairs. And you think, well, I don't think you've understood the conversation we just had about sustainability. But that's fine. Again, that's fine. I think the biggest hurdle I've had is in my own thinking.
Okay.
And I think it's around, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? And because you're setting up transformation tour fundamentally is an events business. And you think, right, there's a runway, there's an airplane parked on that runway that's going to take off on May the 9th. Is that plane full? And so the hurdles is actually sometimes you have great days when you meet great people and you think there's interest. There's some days that's not there. And for me, it's this resilience of putting my hand behind my back, grabbing my shirt, pulling myself. I'm like, come on, move on. And so I think the biggest hurdle I've had so far is in my own thinking and allowing myself to pause, allow myself to take a rest, and that's not easy, and I still struggle with that now. But equally, because I did that 100 people in 100 days, I've built a network of just wonderful people in golf. Yeah. And when I first started, someone gave me this analogy, and I was going to post on this LinkedIn later on, about coffee versus coffers. When you start a business, it's very easy to have lots of coffee with people, but to convert that into coffers and money is a very different question. Yeah. And so to be mindful of where your time has been invested in, but there is something missing in that. And that's something in the middle. And that's another C, which is connectors. Coffee, coffers, and connectors. Now, I've been very lucky to meet a number of wonderful people who are connectors, who are selfless, who aren't asking about their favorite radio station, WeFM, what's in it for me. They want to connect you because they believe in you, they believe in your idea, want to help, and they believe there's a positive karma associated with that. And so for me, embracing my own thinking, leveraging connectors, but the biggest thing I'm now realizing, Will, it's okay to ask for help. Given I ran a large team at Global and I went through the trials and tribulations of, Mark, I need more money. Mark, I need more time off. Mark, that person said something to me. I remember saying to my wife, I'm never hiring anyone ever again. I'm done with this. And the other day, because I'm doing this all by myself, I have to be very careful on my own energy management because I'm a high energy person. Yeah. I remember saying to my wife, I think I could do with a few people. She said, see, I knew you were going to say this at some point. So announced here first, the transformation tour. We'll be looking to hire people in 2024. You can take that as
exclusive.
Exclusive. So for me, that it's okay to be in your own thinking. It's okay, and it's important to ask for help. And don't be afraid to say, I need help. Rather than say, is it okay if we have a coffee to discuss how we might collaborate? And just say, look, I need your help. And because I think when you level with someone at that human level, I think we do want that connection. We do want to help, and we want to see others succeed. And I believe, especially with the people who are helping me connect, there'll be opportunities that flow in mutual directions. But yeah, I think for me, it's the hurdle is less logistically, although I've still got to sell. Yeah, it's here, it's in my mind, and then saying, right, I'm struggling. There's so much to do here. I need help. And just admitting that to yourself, I think is probably the biggest hurdle.
Final 3 questions.
Final 3 questions? Yes. I was expecting final 4.
I wanted to know, who are the people who you are inspired by? Who are the people you listen to, who you read, who you watch, whatever, who inspire you in this kind of space and kind of innovation, who, if people have listened to this and they've gone, God, I've got such a buzz to this and, I want to know more. Who are you kind of being inspired by and who's driving you forward to really kind of like...
So it'd be remiss of me to say how I don't get inspired personally. So my dad has always been this beacon of advice. I remember growing up. So he worked at HSBC 42 years, and he's just this most incredible man. I remember growing up in the car, listening to him complain about EBITDA on the bank with Gloria Stefan cassettes in the car as this kind of backdrop to my childhood. So Gloria Stefan is like the soundtrack to my life growing up. my wife is just this amazing individual, and my kids provide so much insight in how they think. And I love watching how they go through their cycles of marriage and divorce together daily when they love each other and they hate each other. So there's inspiration there, but clearly the viewers aren't going to know those people, or listeners aren't those people. But on the academic side, Professor Jaideep Prabhu, so his work on frugal innovation, I find is just unbelievable. And he is the kindest, warmest man you could ever wish to meet. So his books on Jugaad of frugal innovation are definitely worth reading. I try not to give too many book recommendations because it's a cliche. However, I'm going to break that rule. So 2 wonderful books by Rob Poynton, who do pause and do improvise, are absolutely worth reading. And if anyone wants to read a great book about thinking about the future, I would recommend Rita McGrath's work around seeing around corners. The other one is a fabulous book by Amy Edmondson, who introduces the topic of psychological safety and this idea of intelligent failure. How you can embrace this. They're more on the academic side. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because I enjoy the content. Now, a lot of people sigh when they hear that. They go, it's like wading through a jungle with a butter knife. It's very hard to do. I love underdogs. Maybe that's come from being a Tottenham fan for 40 years. But this
don't underdogs win?
Yeah. Well, now we've got Ange, I'm feeling a lot more confident than I ever have been. As an aside, I've never seen a manager change the style of play so quickly in any team. It's quite impressive. But I love underdogs. So I try to find business people who are starting to share their thoughts or insights rather than the self-professed thought leaders. Yeah. It's trying to get beneath the surface. And that just comes with a slight commitment of time to discover. There are some people who I follow who always give really good insights. So on sustainability, follow Mike Barry. Mike's a friend and a mentor. Equally, when it comes to business insights, there are a number of people that I can think of. But one of my good friends, Johnny Moore, talks a lot about improvisation and storytelling. Jeremy Connor White from IBM, who talks amazingly about storytelling too. It's there. But I think as well, for people with books, you have to go through this journey of self-discovery, because I think it's very important to say, where are you right now and what's next? And to experiment with different forms of books and content to help you find your route forward. Because I think it's too conformist to say, right, Will, this is your point in your career. I recommend book A, B, C, D, and F, and G, and therefore you'll go to X, Y, Z. But it's to allow yourself to experiment. Sometimes I get as much inspiration from reading a kid's book as I may do from reading a business book. Yeah. And because it's just where I am right now, and to accept where I am right now. No problem.
What are the keys to succeeding and following your dreams?
Oh my gosh.
Big ones. 2 big ones for you at the end of this now. It's
hope. I'm going to start with hope. I'm not going to say optimism. There's a link between the two. I remember going to a Cirque du Soleil concert show at the Royal Albert Hall before I had kids, Alegria. And they had this quote at the beginning: if you have no hope, invent. And so it was too cliche to say invention, innovation. But for me, this idea of hope is not like I'm hoping for a better future, but hope just takes me mentally into a place where the world is better. For me, that then gives me a massive call to action about what I need to do today. And often that is innovation, that's new relationships. But this belief in a hope of a better, more inclusive, more just world, that gets me to a certain place. The other thing is around family. Family is everything to me. And I haven't always prioritized that. There's been parts of my life where my career has been the dominant force, but spending more time with my family is one of the massive driving reasons for leaving the commercial world. And, having 2 kids in the house is not always easy. And so I remember being on calls during COVID where the scratches come down the door like poltergeists are trying to enter the room. But the joy, their love, their insight, their passion, their excitement, And I was very lucky to be at Callaway Golf yesterday, and Mark Dougal, another warm, extraordinary man at Callaway, gave me a goodie bag, and the kids' faces when I got home, where they could just ransack this goodie bag. But for me, family is the rock. That's the support, because whether I've had a bad day, a bad call, a great call, an amazing day, they're the constant. So having the family is the foundation. And I kind of include really close friends in that family extension. But having that now, with this hope of the future, comes back to my overarching belief of this future-facing innovation. Understanding what's coming towards you, but with the support systems and infrastructure to try new things. And I think when I left Global, it was probably the first time in my life I've ever surprised my dad. Really surprised him. It's like, wait, you're well paid, you're senior, and you've just gone poof. Yes. Why? Why not?
Why not exactly?
Because the kids are a certain age, it's okay to take some risks. And it's one foot at a time, but that morphine of a salary is an addictive drug. And at some point, it becomes fentanyl, And don't get me wrong, I miss that, the expectations of it. Am I happier? Yes. Am I more excited? Yes. But it's the first time in probably 15 years, I have a fire in me that's telling me this is the right thing. We can get people excited about a positive future. We can teach them about the skills. And we've had this wonderful 400-year-old sport as a vehicle to do it. So hope and family is the short answer to that question.
Are you sure you don't want to run for Prime Minister? Because I think that's the basic essence we need in this country at the moment.
I was joking with a friend last night. So, anyone who has a business, you often receive these emails around lead generation. Like, Will, do you need a lead generation expert? And often I see them, delete. One that really made me burst out laughing, and I won't name the company because I don't want to embarrass them, but a company said to me, have you considered running for the House of Lords? We provide a service that helps you qualify your knowledge and expertise to make this likely. Like for reservations, toll free on 1-800. And I just burst out laughing. And so it's interesting because for me, I've never been interested in public politics, but I do like the idea of coaching and mentoring people to say, what do you want to bring to the table? Yeah. For me, it's learning. It's getting people excited about learning, but not just about the excitement. It's about helping them to find those things that are key to transform. As a side, as a country, as a government, as a world, we have a lot of transforming to do. But that transformation recognizes a personal transformation, and I'm trying not to break into a Michael Jackson song at this point, but this idea of we have to look at ourselves, where are we willing to take the first step, what's next, and then doing that in a shared communal experience is the best way, because we can't transform individually. We have to be that collective, and that comes back to your point at the very beginning, which is we're seeking connection, we're seeking community, and so much learning happens in that format.
Final question, I think it's quite on point, which is, what's the one lesson you want to try and teach your children about life?
Oh, man. Don't listen to Dad. The one lesson I would teach them. You don't always have to know. I think so much negative behavior happens in life and business with this belief that we always have to demonstrate we know the answers. Politicians are great at this because they just make it up. But for me, I think there's so much pressure in believing you have all the knowledge. And I think what flows from that is this willingness to try new things, this willingness to ask for help. But you don't always have to know. And that's okay. And I think if you don't know, you try things, you find out what works and what doesn't work. I mean, when I was at Global, we used to have a fail wall. We used to put things on the wall that didn't work, and it serves two purposes. One, you've shown this willingness and bravery to try things, but also it's efficient, because if you've made a mistake, someone reads it, they don't do it again. But you don't always have to know, because I think for them, as in the pressures they're going to grow up with, I was of a generation where I kind of avoided the social media pressure because it wasn't really there. There was different pressures, but not that one. And for them, there'll be other pressures that come because of AI, deepfakes, misinformation, and that you don't always have to know. If I was allowed a second answer to that question, it comes back to something I remember learning history. So I always wanted to study history. I always loved history. But my dad said, you need to become a museum curator, so go and do something useful like maths. Okay, yes, Dad. But something I love about history is this idea of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. This idea of looking to corroborate evidence. So I want them to be critical thinkers. And we've basically defunded critical thinking in education systems. And this idea of you don't always have to know, but have the commitment to check, to try and find out. Don't take information at face value, check and evidence that. And I think those two create a symbiosis. Yeah. But one of my very, very few parental wins is both kids can identify a Merlin engine on Spitfire when they hear it. So maybe that's the last bit of wisdom that they get.
Oh, fantastic. Mark, thank you so much for your time. Honestly, it's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm super grateful for you coming down here and just talking about your life, talking about innovation, talking about everything. Transformation Tour, I wish you all the success of it. And
thank you very much.
People, if you need to find out about it, LinkedIn, I'll put some tags in it, social medias, whatever, emails. You can find everything you need to find about that there. And I wish you well.
Thank you very much, Will. Thank you all for listening. I wish you all the very best. Cheers.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Valley of Outlaws podcast. Please follow us across Spotify and YouTube and see all our latest news across our socials.